hot on the heels of all that, though, June 1992, the single soundtrack hits. It's often cited. I think it's one of those sort of cultural touchstones that, you know, people of our generation and afterwards just don't really understand, you know, like the Judgment Night soundtrack and all those things that people mention that seem to be important once upon a time. But the single soundtrack is often highly mentioned as a almost like on the heels of Nevermind, the thing that took Seattle to the world and sold, you know, particularly the American public on the idea there was a scene and a thing that was happening, and it collates an awful lot of artists together. And Wood, funny enough, is the primary single from Singles. It sits pretty at track 1 on that soundtrack album. Again, the song that is leading the charge from the sort of album movie package that sells Seattle to the world, and Alice in Chains appear in the movie playing in a club. Have you guys ever watched Singles?
No, it's one of those I feel like I should probably watch at some point, given it's like ties to the whole grunge thing, but I've never actually checked it.
I watched it 2 days ago. It's naff as hell. It is like just like the most fucking bizarre, like Gen X sort of sketch rom-com, I guess. Like it's so funny that like the grunge movie that forever has a place in rock history is on such a just fucking like silly, wet, disposable movie. But I mean, there's a part in it when Alice in Chains are playing in a club. And they're playing, I think they play Ain't Like That, and then they play Wood. And while they're playing, one of the characters goes up to another one of the characters and just like, hey, you only get your one shot to go and say hi to someone for the first time, and all these things. It's like, dude, Alice in Chains are playing right there. They fucking playing like 5 feet away from you, and you're like, hey, I thought I'd come and say hi. And it's like, oh my god, it's so bizarre. But let's talk about Wood as, you know, the single that came out from the single soundtrack first. As we did with We Die Young, we'll talk about it in the context of the album later, but Wood sit next to Man in the Box as Alice in Chains' definitive, you know, most widely played singles. Two very different songs, those. There isn't really a feel for what is a Alice in Chains single generalized. You look at their kind of list of defining anthems, especially again if you go down to the next tier and go, okay, We Die Young on one side, Down in a Hole on the other, even Got Me Wrong from Sap. These aren't songs that you can swap in and out sort of interchangeably. And Wood, I think, in particular, is a very unique song because it's definitely amongst their most concise and accessible singles. Like, it's massive for a reason. It's a hit. But compared to Man in the Box, which is all swagger, Wood is, you know, a direct 3-minute, fairly rocking tune, but it carries itself totally with the brooding, melancholic, extreme emotional intensity and drama of the most affecting Alice in Chains material.
Like, I always find it kind of insane that this is their biggest single. It feels like so jarring that the song that is, again, more punchy, aggressive, but really tragic and melancholic because of the subject matter and everything. And it, like, again, I guess my first coming to it would always be when I came to it at the end of the album, but it doesn't feel like the obvious kind of calling card for what Alice in Chains are to me. It's an amazing song. I love it, but it's kind of jarring in that way to me.
Yeah, I didn't realise that Wood was as big as it was until fairly recently. Because, like you say, my association with this song is almost entirely just listening to Dirt, and without getting into that record, one of the things I think is so great about this song is in part because of the sequencing and its place on the record. Because after the weight of what you've been through, it's maybe the most radio-friendly song in the batch, but it doesn't really feel like a light at the end of the tunnel. It's like, you know, don't go into the light. It's beautiful and it's seismic, but it's like you say, mournful and kind of devastating. It's so like atypical of like a big single, even for grunge, which is always painted as like the moody, downer era of popular rock music.
It's a stunning song, Wood. Like, again, like Man in the Box, it's one of the mega hits from this era that I don't get tired of, and it's big, you know, in a big part because emotionally this thing knocks you on your ass, you know? Again, it's not like a Smells Like Teen Spirit or something where it's all just, you know, rage and angsty youth bottled in kind of brilliant pop sensibilities. Wood feels as much like, you know, it's 10 whiskeys deep drowning its sorrows as it does like a banger rock song. And particularly as we're going to see a lot of on Dirt, it makes you wonder sort of how the hell they put it together as a skeleton. Like, it's built on that bass riff, which is a great bass line, pure and simple. The guitar parts are all those like little embellishments and textural work, though. And, you know, they've taken the vocal approach from those like Sap singles sessions. No one else is going to be able to achieve that, because verse-wise, it's another song where Cantrell takes the lead, and Staley only chimes in with those like higher harmony parts. But, you know, it's that weird kind of trademark Alice in Chains fifth interval that makes it sound really dark and alien. And the best things about the songs that start like that is when they can save, like I was saying, Staley as a secret weapon to hit the chorus hard. Like, I suppose we'll touch on this some more throughout, but the Jarl, the ever ripped on Jarl associated with post-grunge, pioneered in its purest form, of course, by Eddie Vedder, but why does Lane Staley's take on the Jarl feel like a kind of different thing? He doesn't get the pelters for pioneering it the way that Vedder does.
For me, it's never... I'm not saying it's put on by Vedder, but Vedder is the kind of the one that everyone's ripped off at and put on. For Lane Staley, it's just always felt so natural, and the kind of like that emotional outpouring, that kind of like, whenever he's really doing that, it's him letting rip on the emotions.
It's harder to ape, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's it. Is that there's a pain to Staley's that like you can't rip off.
Staley, it's kind of like he's doing it through gritted teeth, whereas Vedder, and particularly the people that copy him, it just sounds like they've got a bit of an underbite. Like, it doesn't really sound like the. If you haven't got the kind of menace,
listen to Matchbox 20 there.
If you haven't got the sort of drama and the edge to it, it doesn't really carry that much emotional resonance in and of itself. Whereas Lane, he kind of uses it almost like as a character.
Yeah, it's, for me, the big part is pure emotional agony. And, you know, sometimes it's so twisted and ugly in a way you'll often hear on Dirt in particular. But, you know, of all the Yarlers, Lane feels the least like someone putting on a voice, and the most like just some insane flood of wounded feeling just pouring out of him all at once. And the chorus of Wood is potentially the all-time best example of that particular detail. Like, it is unbelievable when that hits. It is the kind of performance that genuine, like, once-in-a-generation singers give. Like, you are hooked onto every word of that chorus, and you believe it all. 100%. And it's got those weird compositional quirks of Alice in Chains as well, the strange jarring endings. This beautiful song just collapses with, if I would, could you... Like, it's so... It comes to a screeching halt. And that is what leads us into the album Dirt in the Campaign, which is released on September the 29th of 1992. Once again recorded with Dave Jerden, but partially in Los Angeles this time, right as the 1992 LA riots start. I believe the first day of sessions for Dirt is when those start, which results in a brief sort of escape the city trip to them out to the Joshua Tree Desert, where they take Tom Araya with them, and they sort of hang there for a few days, who then famously would feature on the brief track on Dirt, Iron Gland. Fans rumoured for quite a long time that Lane Staley's girlfriend, Demry Perrott, was the girl on the cover. It's actually a model called Maria O'Brien, who is in another Rocky Shank photo shoot. Weirdly, she also appeared on the cover of Spinal Tap's single Bitch School, if you want to see completely a different context of what she's doing on Dirt. I've always really liked the Dirt cover. It's very mysterious and enigmatic and kind of haunting in a way. It's almost like you don't know if she's been... You know, it could be some sort of spirit who's been there for 1,000 years, just as easily it could be a girl who's been murdered and dumped in the desert. You know, like, it's very enigmatic as an image.
It's one of those things that I think could almost look like a bad Photoshop if it was less...
It could be a bit like the Creed covers, you know, where they're in a tree.
That's it. It drifts so close to that, but because you're right, it's got that kind of, like, ethereal... Almost like... Twin Peaks imagery with like the Laura Palmer body, like that kind of thing to it. So it has that darker side to it that it looks more interesting and less, like I say, less naff.
Yeah, I kind of asked myself even, like, is this an album cover that I like so much because it's on Dirt? Do you know what I mean? Where if something's on something so iconic, you just get used to it. Like you say, weathered by Creed. It's going to be funny whatever's on the album cover. It's the fact that it's Creed just makes it hilarious. And with this, I think like you say, the ethereal quality to it, my exposure to this record for years was just that I had it on my iTunes, and you only get that tiny image, and that whole, like, you know, the boomer complaint of you're just looking at it and it's the size of your thumbnail, you don't get to see the... In this case, it's a bit of a backhanded compliment. I think it kind of works, because I used to just strain looking at it, going like, is there actually someone there? Or is it just like...
What is that?
Yeah, lines in the sand and the way like trees are on the horizon or something, it makes it look like there's a person there. Yeah, it really, like you say, it treads the line between like great and bad, but I think it lands firmly in the... Like, it is one of those covers that just exudes the record that it's on the face of.
Yeah, and very, very appropriately they're taking us into... This is an album that projects that kind of everything that is associated with it and everything that it touches, everything that has touched it, feels... It's almost like hot to the touch. It's so palpable all these decades on that has still made Dirt such a eternal touchstone. When we talk, again, we were talking the transition from Facelift to Sap of like really brilliant cocksure young rocker band into the kind of band who are going to be treated with a serious level of gravitas and, you know, hush tone in the voice we were talking about. Dirt is where that truly, you know, is sealed in history books. And I guess following that change over, you know, a couple of years just is Facelift was this like welcome to Seattle kind of record where it took major inspiration from, you know, their city and surroundings for its darker content. But by the time you reach Dirt, the band themselves are like firmly grasped by that darkness and addiction, and this is now being swallowed up by some of the same sort of societal things, I guess, that existed on Facelift. Wood focuses on the death of Mother Love Bone's vocalist Andrew Wood from heroin. Staley himself had his first unsuccessful rehab attempt by this point. He clashed with Jerden heavily during the sessions of this album over his heavy drug use getting in the way of recording. Jerden has a really great quote where it's like, I wasn't there to kind of hang out with him and be his friend. I was there to make a record, and that's what's going on here. But Dirt, you know, by name, quite simply is the heroin album, but it has more going on even than just that. And by Dirt, they are living it, you know? Like, the band have changed in 2 years. They've gone on tour. Seattle has suffered its first losses, and this is a tormented result of a serious couple of years by the fucking sounds of it. That it's the most like unfiltered, brazen look straight down into hell, I think, that this scene produced. Really, like, it's so unglamorized. This album, more than any other album from these bands, is like lifting up the cerecloth off of a corpse in the morgue. Like, next to In Utero, it is the most disaffected sort of, but this is even more like strung out, you know, album of this generation. The entire sort of spirit of that thing summed up in this album. And there is this aura on this, where this album, again, it generally has the same feel to me as like Johnny Cash songs or whatever, where like at its root core, just hearing that man sing those songs, it just feels like unignorably true in some sense. And there is this incredible truth and all permeating sort of feeling to the songs on Dirt.
It is such a unflinching kind of band, like I say, staring into sort of the abyss, and you kind of living through all of their pain. Like, it is one of those albums that it is horrible that the sort of circumstances that this album comes about from and what that will then lead on to, but at the same time, it is something that is, they create a genuine kind of monolith of a record that couldn't exist in different circumstances. The fact that this album is like essentially them just telling the story of like, we are falling apart because of addiction and loss and pain and suffering, and just channeling that into this album, it does mean that there is a unmatched power to it that other albums can't do. But again, you kind of go like, at what cost does that come at?
I think it's easy to forget that Alice in Chains were only really rock stars for maybe one record, and then so quickly it felt like almost like reality had set in, and
yeah,
The whole like cliche of all the best music was made by people on drugs, the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, bloody bloody blah. Dirt is almost like the most extreme, divisive point of that, in a sense, because, as we'll get to, it is one of those watershed rock and metal records like Lateralis or Master of Puppets or The Downward Spiral, but it's also the sound of one individual in particular ruining his whole life.
It's like a warning about that sort of attitude, And I think, again, the result to that just incredible gravitas of it is that crossover that Alice in Chains have into all sorts of terrains. Like, this is a huge selling mainstream record for the time, but also, fans of truly heavy music, like people who wouldn't consider themselves Seattle fans, but the harrowing doom, the dusty, sort of death aura that exists on this album. Alice in Chains, grunge band, appeal to metalheads, appeal to goths, appeal to, country or folk fans. Dirt is the nexus of all of that. And at the same time, it's beautiful. It's life affirming at times. I really love the way it talks in like elemental forces a lot of the time. Rain and blood and bones. I love that line, I lie dead gone under a red sky. Like, it's everything about the album kind of exists, in the air, exists in the dirt. And, even though it's urban crack dens, it's as eternal as it is current and contemporary in a way. Like, it feels like Dirt is this unwavering presence that just continues to have power over like any era of music. This is a Seattle album, but it's also a completely eternal and timeless piece of work. And for all of the unbelievable aura of weight and sorrow and beauty that exists around this album, when we talk about albums opening again, purely in terms of how they come out of the traps, how the fuck they managed to top the way the previous albums opened with those two songs. But one of the all-time ridiculous starts to a rock record is the first two tracks on this album. They come as a pairing, don't they? You wouldn't want them to play one without immediately, segueing into the other one.
It's the thing is, when I hit play on this, and then Bones comes in and that riff hits, and I'm just like, this is the best opener to a grunge album ever. I just want to, like, swing my fist around. It's so powerful. That chorus hits, all that, and I'm like, this is the best thing ever. It can't get any better. And then that riff to Damn That River hits, and I'm like, oh, no. Yep, it can get fucking better. Because, like, and again, like, it feels weird to get so hyped about an album that is born from such pain and all that, but that opening 1-2 of two of just the best kind of shit-kicking rock songs you're ever going to hear, like, it can't be matched.
First time I heard Them Bones was like, but I don't know, maybe I was like 10 or 11, and I'd kind of been slightly seasoned in extreme music by then. I thought I kind of knew it all. I was like, Slayer, that's, pedestrian. I've heard Converge and the like. And then I got around to Alice in Chains, and it was like, oh, they're sort of in the grunge camp. And I thought, oh, well, those weaklings like Nirvana and those cowards like Pearl Jam. And then the first, opening 3 seconds, like, what the fuck? Like, that discordant ascending riff, and that, like, I don't even know what you shout, like, da!
Yeah.
But then for that to give way to that I Feel So Alone, like, harmonic bit, like, Pearl Jam would cut off their collective faces for a chorus that Sky opening. And then, like you say, 2.5 minutes of that, already exhausted, and then Damn That River comes in, and you're like, where's the monster truck? I've got to go car crushing.
Honestly, that's a stomp on Damn That River. Like, yeah.
Them Bones is it's a vicious nightmare, isn't it? Like, not many albums grab you by your hair and like hold your head under the water the way that Dirt does with Them Bones. Like, when I was learning about like odd time signatures and I was learning an instrument, this was one of the examples of like, oh, this is what 7/8 is. Just that kind of weird, awkward, like the way, again, Alice in Chains, they pull those rugs out from under you, and those ascending notes, sounding hellish rather than, revelatory or whatever. The way it switches from that harsh chug in the main verses into sort of the same riff but open chords in the verses, and that makes it sound scarier somehow. It's almost like a similar effect to like Pinion at the start of the Nine Inch Nails Broken EP, but through a riff. That sort of like eyes widening terror siren of it, and it is accentuated by Lane's just apparently just fully improvised in the studio horror screams on it of just over it. And how easy would it be for that to be cartoonish and goofy, right? Like, imagine if any post-grunge band put that kind of like sort of vocal on something, but Them Bones is genuinely fucking disorientating.
Well, it got me thinking about like that bit in Some Kind of Monster where Bob Rock goes to Lars and says, I want you to take that microphone and scream fuck as loud as you can. And even on a record with like so little editing, that doesn't appear because they're just going, okay, bad idea, never mind. Like, as an idea, just going, Lane, I want you to just go, as the riff comes in each time. It's not a great idea.
He repeats it. It's not just doing it once. It's not like a ooh or something. He does it every time when the riff comes round.
And then, like, when he does the really long ones, like he's in Home Alone, he's clutching his face. And again, like, the sort of thing where you just go, that is so close to stupid. And yet, I always think back to that first time I heard the song, and that, it's just like, no matter how loud you play it, it's a jump scare.
It's powerful.
Yeah, and
it's just like raw power to start your record.
And I think it's because the vocal line that it kind of moves into as well. One of the most bizarre vocal lines for like a hit single. Like it's difficult to listen to in a way. Like it's abrasive and uncomfortable. That droning I was talking about earlier. I believe that shouldn't be a fucking single.
It's do you know what it is?
Upsetting is what that is.
It's the juxtaposition of this song between like how monstrous and like scary the riff is, the weird unsettling verse, but then you hit that chorus.
Yeah,
and that magic that we talked about when the Man in the Box chorus and all that. When you get there, I feel so alone.
It's so catchy and so singable. It's got a really wry, dry, dark humour, this song, and under discussed with Them Bones. I think one of the best Jerry Cantrell guitar solos of all time. So
good.
Which by definition also makes it one of the best guitar solos of all time. And then wallop. Particularly the way they switch out of that 7/8 into straight anvil 4/4. Has any riff ever swung its dick harder than Down That River? No. It might be the most swaggering riff of all time, while being that heavy. Like it's that rock and roll Alice in Chains of old, except it's on this record of like pure audio horror. It's been, prefaced by Them Bones. It's so disaffected and nasty and overflowing to the brim with spite. Even it's got that wah effect in the verse, but it's like it's so spiteful. And Lane again in that song occupies like 3 different registers in just like a 3-minute rocker. Like goes from that kind of weird wah aping thing in the verse to genuinely some of the most vicious vocal tones to ever come out of a grunge singer on the like tearing his throat out. Again, imagine opening your album with the better 2 songs than We Die Young into Man in the Box. Fucking mental.
Yeah, like it like I say, Down the River is one that just catch me. Like I've listened to them so many times, but Down the River genuinely just catches me off guard every time.
It's because you feel like you need a moment to recover from them
to
bones.
Process them
just,
bones.
Oh my god!
And that riff just hits. And
it's
like
a wrestling move being hitting you. Like
I said, this is a song that is clearly from a band who are like almost fighting each other in the studio. If like the kind of the stories that lead into this are like what they say. So and that's the sound of this song, just kind of them taking out their anger on each other basically. And it is violent and angry, but it is just a perfect rock song.
It feels like you're riding a quad bike. Like after Them Bones, where you just feel like you're going into quicksand, like within half a second you're going over dunes like with your boys. And Sean Kinney, like having just spoken about him, maybe his best drum performance. Like, just so clever, like, using the bell of the ride on the main riff. It was just exaggerates it even more, makes it feel even more monolithic and swaggering. It's just... I mean, like you say, the transition from We Die Young into Man in the Box is one of the all-time great 1-2s. Like, the way that just... And it's almost like the reverse, where it's just like the vamp and the swagger's shut off, and then suddenly you're trudging. This is like you're drowning, and then you've been fired out of a cannon.
Yeah, there's some really cool drum stuff going on in Them Bones as well, particularly on the I Feel So Alone. He's kind of tapping that ride, really good. Production-wise, it's one of the best sounding rock records of all time. Like guitar tone, drum tone. Yeah. What would you change about this? There's nothing in the mix where you go, oh, that's a bit off. Like the thickness and the power of everything is unreal, while having that real organic, like dirt from the walls still under your fingernails when you leave the studio kind of quality. Like, it's blockbuster and scummy at the same time somehow.
And like then you on the flip side, you get it when it needs to be. Those moments where it needs to be delicate. It just everything is so perfectly tuned to just hit the right spot. And like I say, yeah, nothing needs any changing on this record.
Yeah, and I guess it is often said, like we were talking about with the influences, that Alice in Chains are kind of more accurately a metal band than the nebulous, doesn't really describe a sound, I guess, grunge term. And you can absolutely, again, hear that here. Look at those first two songs on this album. Those are metal songs, pure and simple. But I think a big part of the magic of Dirt and the unique sound of it is surely the sort of the complementing of that with the distinctly, unmetal approach that they, developed on SAP that gets you to the songs like Down in a Hole and Rooster and stuff, again, demoed alongside the SAP EP, features much more in the way of softer and more intimate material than Facelifted. The increased diversification of the band's roles continues on this, where Staley fully writes the songs Hate to Feel and Angry Chair for the first time on his own, originally apparently envisioned for some sort of Ministry-esque industrial side project, but then, fit them into here. And, when thinking about the eternal just magic of this album and that mixture and the moments that it gives you, that Dirt, the experiences that went into Dirt and the way they feel like people transformed just from 2 years ago, from life on the road and the first losses that were hit in Seattle and so on. Again, like Cantrell on his part, there's a lot of songs about death, like Them Bones. Obviously, famously, as we'll get to on Rooster, his father's experiences in the Vietnam War. Down in a Hole is a love song, and it still reads like that. Like the lightest, most frivolous topic on this album is probably the fight in Down That River where Sean Kinney breaks a table over Jerry Cantrell's head, and that's like as kind of jolly as Dirt really gets. And Down in a Hole, I think, is, when we talk about the other side of Dirt and how they sort of feed into each other, that's where that just like weight of existence conveyed through a bare bones song really hits you. Like, it's one of those songs that everybody, I don't care who you are, you have to take note of and go, wow, okay, like you have to respect that, Down
in the Hole is one of the songs that just kind of just leaves me just like kind of just hushed, and how I kind of like have to just sit there and just take in every little aspect of it, every guitar note, vocal line, harmony, the lyrics, just really just let it wash over me. I think it is total magic across like those like 5 or so minutes it lasts, Down in a Hole. Like,
the acoustic guitar lines. Doesn't matter how many sad acoustic rock songs you've heard, particularly in the post-grunge era. This one comes on, and it's like, the only parallel is Hurt. You pay attention. It's such a cliche, but like you will weep to this song.
On an album as perfect as this, some songs are more perfect than others, and Down in a Hole is one of those where you just go, find me the thing you think should be different. Because, I mean, that thing I said earlier about having the mixing desk in front of you could just imagine, like, there's so many just great, even if you take away how great the song is, which is so hard to ignore anyway, in terms of just the arrangement of it, it's unbelievable. Like, Facelift was clearly a super talented, like, accomplished rock and metal band. This is just the sound of them lapping their peers, in my opinion. Because, like, those Queen-style guitars, when they, like, burst in over that rusty intro, it's like having lemon juice squirted in your eyes when you're sitting in a bowl of treacle, and yet kind of nice. And the whole song, all like 5.5, 6 minutes of it, you can just look out for those moments, or you can just take it all in and go, fucking hell, that's one of those, like, genuine stop and turn and look accomplishments of songwriting.
Yeah, I mean, Staley on that song, it different to the times I've been mainly raving about Staley in the special so far are, things like Man in the Box or Wood, where he belts and lets go. This is the most, like, beaten down, like, it's so defeated, helpless. He's like a little, like a little baby bird in a nest or something, just like completely, like...
It's that, like, robbing you of that hook, that lift of the I'd like to fly, and then but my wings have been so denied. Like, it's so... You're about to get that release, that emotional lift, and then it's just pulling it away from you, and that pain that he projects into that line.
Well, I mean, it's a hilariously horny song as well. But, you know, and channeling that through the kind of, the sadness of being down in the hole, I need you to lift me out. But the two-pronged chorus, again, hearing him deliver those lines is just like melodic perfection. Like how a delivery of a melody can just bring grown men to their knees. This is like the A+ example. And most interestingly, I think, when you're talking about that line, Sam, is Cantrell wrote this song. And I think hitting a peak on this album, those two guys almost complete each other in a way that is you find so few examples of across musical history. They seem to fill in each other's experiences and share the same melancholy. And Cantrell doing the I'd Like to Fly, and then Staley comes in with a but my wings have been denied. Like, it is a properly like brotherly sense of chemistry that you feel in how they complete each other's thoughts in the songwriting process throughout this.
It's one of those things like you don't always like when you know things like really obvious like vocal interplay between the two vocalists. They fit together so seamlessly, so naturally that you just kind of
they're like extensions of the same being.
That's really it. It's just carrying on, flowing. So I think that like you might not even like pick up when it's changing vocalists because they're just so in tune with each other and like I said, and complete each other as like emotional experiences.
There's a great video of David Lee Roth. We were talking about the Beatles earlier, and he explains the contrast between Paul and Lennon-style melodies and the harmony that creates. And he gives an example of it, and it's like the Paul one is something like ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-dum, and then Lennon goes ba-da-da-da-dum, da-dum, and he uses the phrase, he's the salt in the caramel. There's something kind of harmonious and right about it, and yet it's haunting and not always comfortable. There's a sort of sourness to it. And the only other band where I've seen that, and there have been some great dual vocal dynamics in the history of rock and metal, is Alice in Chains. Like you say, it is that thing where the chemistry between them, it's hard to imagine we could live in a world where they didn't find each other.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest rock ballads of all time, arguably the greatest. The fact that even just watching a Code Orange live stream decades after this album's release, watching Reba cover that song, felt like one of the most special musical moments of that year. Like Down in a Hole is you know, it's elemental, you know. And then Rooster is, again, arguably the ultimate Jerry Cantrell song in terms of what songs do you associate with him rather than Lane. Everybody knows what Rooster is about and where it comes from, but Lane sings almost all of it because they are extensions of each other, you know. And Lane singing that song is that character, you know. He is Jerry Cantrell's dad on that song. He even directly name drops Jerry's mother, Gloria, in the "sent me pictures of my boy" line. Like, it's so intimate. Can you imagine like writing a song and trusting someone enough to sing the part of your own father like that?
For everything I just said about Down in the Hole, I think Rooster might be the best song on the record. And it's the thing you just described because it's able to evoke such a particular emotion despite being sung by someone who the song isn't about, and that person's not even really connected to the person that song's about. Because that...
but he gets it.
Yeah, it just nails it. Because that gradual, like, softly build into that break of Here They Come to Snuff the Rooster, it's like the sun breaking through a blanket of black clouds or something. And I think, like, lyrically, as like a look at what it's like to be a war vet, it might be the best example a rock or metal band has ever done. Because I think there's this thing, like, particularly for American vets, like for all wars since World War II, where there's that sort of sense of what was it all for? And this song, without ever directly asking that, is able to capture that feeling so perfectly, while just by being so sort of precise and vivid in its word choices. It's just beyond other bands.
I mean, the song takes about 2 minutes to change the part at all, really. Like, it just lets those chords hang and those sort of cooing melodies reverberating over the top. But it's so immediately evocative. Like, the first 2 minutes of that song might as well be the grunge equivalent of the opening scene of Apocalypse Now with Martin Sheen in his room, like, waving his arms around. Like, it just absolutely hypnotizes you and puts you in that headspace. Like, you could probably listen to that for several more minutes before they even do it. And you're right, the imagery, like particularly with the video, really amplifies that with the Vietnam footage. But the just the name, the rooster, and got my pills against mosquito death. My buddy's dying, his breathing his dying breath. Like it's so vivid and desperate in the reality of that. But I love that it's not the most dejected song on the record. It's not even as openly sad as Down in a Hole, because despite all of this, it's set off by Ain't Found a Way to Kill Me Yet, and how like stirring, invigorating it is when the wall of rock instrumentation slams in, and he boots off with a he ain't gonna die. Like it plays as like this slow motion memory of what guys like Cantrell's dad went through. It's a doom song more than it even is a ballad like Down in a Hole, really. But it has this spirit of sort of defiance in it and survival and, enduring and living with your experiences, which I think is what particularly, again, the aftermath, the living with what you felt in those times. That is what has made it such an important, moving song for so many people.
I think it's taking that as well and coming up with, again, just big rock songwriting without ever cheapening that message, that lyrical content. So like it can be, a like that chorus is catchy and powerful, but it never feels like, they're kind of lessening the emotional weight and impact of, again, what is a deeply personal song for some of the members of it, as well as a subject matter that is, again, going to be for so many people one of those really defining, hard to process moments. And being able to do that in a song that is catchy and anthemic whilst being kind of melancholic is again, it's just that amazing songwriting sort of like chemistry they have.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting part of the album overall, I guess, because you largely think of Dirt as particularly Lane Staley's, chronicles of his heroin addiction and so on. And obviously Rooster doesn't fit in with that, but it fits in as this, kind of a man locked in some kind of struggle against forces larger than himself, and there's obviously like, serious, heroin addicts kind of being created over the process of the Vietnam War. Obviously Black Sabbath had a Doom about that same sort of thing. Yeah. But in this album that's stooped in drugs and misery, Rooster almost jumps back like prelude to the event, like decades to, an event that created loads of addicts by putting men, young men through this meat grinder. I think Dirt is a very masculine album, and that's not to say that people who don't identify as men can't get in on it, but the way Lane and Jerry write so personally about their experiences, it really feels like an album about some of the emotional pressures that are faced by young men, and then the dark situations and states of minds that they end up in, kind of repressing or stewing in those things. Like the part in Hate to Feel that's like, all this time I swore I'd never be like my old man, what the hell, it's time to face exactly what I am. It's like Cash-esque, kind of very masculine sort of torment and struggle with the self, kind of speaking in those biblical terms with it. And there's something about that element in this album that I find so palpable and so again realistically heavy.
I think it's that kind of idea of like men repressing their emotions and not processing it, and the damage that causes and how that is spiraling out and destroying so much else around them, and having to kind of face up to that and process that, and again how that could potentially been something that had affected the band when they're fighting and writing songs about that with Damn That River. It's all about that, that masculine sort of feeling and kind of and how to come to terms with that.
I think, I don't know, maybe there's an extension of what you were saying about the masculine thing, I don't know. But there's a quality to Dirt that I think makes it much more tangibly distressing and emotionally resonant, I think, than a lot of the other albums in this kind of field. And it's this idea that you often create your own problems, where I don't know if you'd call it self-pity, but there's rarely a serious problem described on the record or experienced by Lane or what have you, maybe with the exception of Rooster, where there isn't some quality of it's my fault and I could have prevented it. And there's something so much more sad. And I think that's why we imbue you're saying like things like honour and looking at yourself, looking at the kind of person you are. If horrible things have just happened to you and you have no role in it, you're not really demanded to make that much of a judgment of yourself. Whereas if you're looking at yourself and going, I put myself here, what does that say about me? That's that's raw.
Yeah, like the I think the particularly the further you get into the album, the more true that becomes with it.
Yeah.
But the twisted headspace of this record, compositionally, even more so than Facelift, translates to a really weird genius. Like, there are parts of this album more so than the other huge grunge albums that are like semi-avant-garde. Like
Sick Man wedged in between Down in a Hole and Rooster being these two like more like soft emotional moments, and then you get this freak out song in Sick Man like being so
I think it comes
frantic.
earlier than that. Because I mean, them bones alone, you could say, is in there. But like, Rain When I Die, I think is the first. Like, what is this? Because the opening minute of that is like waking up in some shady pit of squalor, surrounded by fucking God knows what sonically. Like, there's that churning bass line being piled beneath, guitar feedback, clinking glasses, and there's an unsettling looping moan from Staley, where again you're like, who brought you to lay that down and loop that in that way? And then it has again when it hits the wah riff, it's got all of that cocksure swagger, but it's been contextualized here in like this sleazy shithole song that's so grimy. It like fades back in at the end with that like moan that comes back in. It's again really every time it's like you can't sit comfortably with it, and yet you hear the melody in that song. And the fact that it wasn't even one of the 5 singles from this album seems bananas. You hear that and you go, no matter how weird anything else is, that should be one of the ultimate standards of the era.
Rain When I Die is it's one of my favourite songs Alice in Chains ever did, and it's everything you've just said about it, like how strange it is, how you don't know where it's going, you don't even know how it wants you to feel. And then, like, if you didn't think Lane Staley was one of the best vocalists of his era before, that I think it's gonna rain. That's like...
Again, the necessary over-singing.
Yeah, that's like throw open the button shirt, let the wind throw your hair back moment, and he's saying, I think it's going to rain when I die, which is like the peak of self-pity. It's just like... But as you say, the over-singing quality, it just injects this song which feels like it's dying the whole way, with just like, you've put the defibrillator on it.
Yeah, like the dude has to just go ham on those notes like that. It's insane. Like, if anyone ever nails that in karaoke, it's like, damn, fuck yeah, you go for it. And then the record gets darker and spirals, and that's when Sick Man really comes to the equation, because that is such an ugly, twisted, perverse song. Like, that's in league with like Acid Bath and other bands that are like that upsetting to listen to. The sick, nasty imagery, harrowing delivery. It even threatens to be a bit of a banger for like the first like 30 seconds, and then it just hits that like screaming at you wall and falls into that like horrible, dissonant, broken waltz part. Like, I'm struggling to not keep using the word sick in my description because they really summed it up with that one. But like, differently to any other album like this, the riffs and the arrangements themselves truly start to feel kind of diseased. And just listening to the structure of Sick Man and how it like staggers between those parts, it gains a little bit of energy and then it crashes down again. It puts you in the headspace of someone seriously fucking suffering from something.
Yeah, the anger on like because I haven't gone similar. The most catchy part of it, apart from the Sick Man sort of shout, like the verses I would say are way catchier than the actual choruses on Sick Man. And the what the hell am I?
Yeah,
like the way he's just like banging out those tones, but it's coming from like a genuine just kind of like anger and just spitting out these lyrics of like knowing that you are, like, say, dirty and diseased and broken and just trying to find a way to get out there. And it is, like I say, it is a mangled, twisted, like, horrible song that, again, like, you're right, teases you with it could be a bit more of a banging rock tune if it wanted to be, but it's like, no, we're not doing that. We are ripping this song apart and kind of showing you the ugly underbelly and the underside of what this kind of like heroin-fueled party is when you get into like the nastier side of it. It's an incredible song, but it's one that is genuinely like quite an uneasy listen.
Once you get past Down in a Hole, this record, it almost feels like you've got a horrible hangover in the best way possible. Like when you've had one that's really bad, you just go, I want a whole new body. I want all my blood to be replaced. I want all my organs like fresh. I need a fresh start. There's a sense of like wrongness and like radioactive, diseased ill quality once you get over the hump of the record. And it's, again, I've listened to this record, I don't even know how many times, and I kind of forget because the first 4 songs themselves are pretty punishing, and then it does the South of Heaven thing and gets more unsettling, not by going harder or faster or even heavier necessarily, just by making you feel ill.
Yeah, and it's, it's Dirt isn't a concept album, but there is a conceptual sort of part of it where there's the kind of section of songs that goes from Junkhead through to Angry Chair that lyrically are all written by Staley, and that is really the kind of, I've taken to calling it the heroin suite. It's basically where he chronicles his, initially it's turning to drugs in order to ease kind of, personal pain and relationship problems or whatever have you, whatever it may be. And then the further into that series of songs, the addiction kind of grips tighter and tighter, and it eventually becomes the primary source of the pain and basically all he's thinking about. And I think that, again, it's an interesting thing because he'd express his uncomfortability with fans thinking like the earlier songs like Junkhead, which starts that, being these sort of like cool endorsements of substance abuse. But it's, the first part of a section that is a downward spiral from that point. And it's essentially half the album, that. Like, it's almost the entirety of side B. And for such a long stretch, it's the ugliest, nastiest stuff that these bands would put on a record like this. And that doesn't even include Sick Man, which you've already gone through. And this album, it's like it marinades you in the fucking just awfulness of this experience. Junkhead, for starters, what a riff. Again, it's so sickly and grimy, particularly in the verses when it just trudges along, but it's all power as well. Like some of the most all-consuming doom in a riff since Tony Iommi. Laying on that song is like peak Twisted Jarl, like it kind of a warped delivery with how far he takes it. It becomes like a nightmare. And even still, because it's the most hedonistic part of that particular run, tying it up with that anthemic sensibility, where I challenge you to not sing along to those harmonies in What's My Drug of Choice. It's another vocal line that feels like ubiquitous and synonymous with this era.
Yeah, I find it funny that people would see this as an endorsement, because to me it's almost like it's from the perspective of the drug. Like it's trying to coax you into it. That's not to say that you should want to go in on it. And I think maybe like the vocal harmonies make the song feel slightly jovial, but for me, I've always found this song, on a record full of unsettling moments, one in that bracket.
Yeah, I agree. And there's that, we are an elite race of our own, the stoners, junkies, and freaks. Like, at that point in the album, it's like a kind of drop out of society thing. It's you elites there with your books and your degrees. You don't understand us. And that's, again, where it's sort of coming from. I don't want to be like you. But then it turns twisted. And, like, each song in that section becomes like a warped, contorted continuation of the one before. The title track. Where the hell does that, like, Middle Eastern approach come from? Like, that really dark, unsettling, droning approach to everything. And that song gives you no relief from that. Like, it's melodic still, and you find yourself going along with it because it's a well-written song, but it's all in this, like, almost like mind-altering zone, the way a doom metal track from, like, an Electric Wizard or someone would be.
There is just this uncomfortable rawness to the title track where it is, at this point, like, the addiction has fully taken hold, and like it's the verse of the I would taste dirty, a stinging pistol in my mouth. Like, it's pouring out every negative emotion of like, this substance has ruined you, and you're not at the bottom yet. It's how bleak and horrible it can get, whilst again still just being this really, like, in a way, adventurous approach to songwriting that makes it stand out and not just be this like miserable dirge of a song.
There's a funny thing, or say funny thing, there's a thing that people say about heroin addiction, and it's that eventually the person isn't addicted, they kind of the drug becomes them, in that it affects every single thing they do, it affects their behaviour, to the point where they're almost just a blank slate if not for the drug. And the song Dirt, I think, captures that so well, because it's so alien and unwelcoming that on the songs before that have been depressing or on that tone, it's because there's such a strong human connection to Lane and Jerry's vocals. By the time you get to this sweet in the record, it's like they're not even there.
Yeah. Like Godsmack is horrid to listen to. Like, properly discomforting.
The band or the song?
Both, I guess. It's so funny that band presumably took their name from this like absolute nightmare of a song. And they just went, yeah, okay, I stand alone. But like the vibrato that he does on that verse line, like a bit of his own sort of sheep moment, but just like a nightmare. And then switches up into, I guess, the closest thing on Dirt to like the funk rock parts of Facelift on the, what in God's name? But everything this album throws at you just gets swamped in like the wider context of the album and the mood that it's created. I don't think there's another album like this from the sort of grunge and alternative rock bands of the 90s, which quite works as like a journey and a sort of overall piece like this does.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think like the approach to songwriting as well enhances, like I say, it's not a concept album, but again, Godsmack having this kind of like funk and like uplifting vibe in the song that is horrible in the lyrics and the content, again, just adds to the twisted nature of like the heroin and the destructive power and the kind of broken overdose it can leave you with, but that enticing you to stick your arm for some real fun. Like that whole character of it is all over the record, not just in the lyrics but in the music and the vocal approach, and it means that it does create a journey and experience that you really go on.
Yeah, and there's just fucking Iron Gland in there, which feels like it should be a skit, like the hidden track on Sap. Like, it's sort of an obvious riff on I Am Iron Man, except Tom Araya just yells one word, and there's that kind of weird, like, Twilight Zone-y, like, joke riff that Cantrell is fucking around with. But it's so sonically upsetting that it somehow fits in right after Godsmack, like this just, like, horrible hit to the vein, and then, the kind of drunken trouble / Candlemass riff of Hate to Feel can come right out of it, staggering around, not knowing where it is, eyes glazed over. It's like the equal to any I Hate God part from that time in terms of like disgusted horror.
Well, like you're talking about like which of their peers did a song or captured this vibe. Maybe the most famous example would be something like Something in the Way by Nirvana, but one of the things that makes that song great and the performance of it is that Kurt doesn't sound like he's bothered. Like he's just weak enough. He's only just strong enough to get through it. The reason why something like Iron Gland is genuinely disconcerting is like, you've not written a song. You're proper at the end of your tether at that point. It's just 43 seconds of a band falling apart. I mean, it does kind of make me laugh they got Tom Araya to do it, because it's just like,
Gland! It's so recognisable, yeah.
I mean, like you say, he is recognisable, so I guess worth getting him for. But it is funny that Tom Araya, he's on that Alice in Chains record. Again, imagine you've gone to see them and you go, okay, if Tom Araya signed off on it, and you've spent your 15 quid and you get one word from your hero. But just and like you say, just having it in the middle of the record, where most bands would have it as a secret track. It's around this time, like 15 minutes into the last song or something. So just disconcerting.
It reminds me of things like the title track of The Downward Spiral, where it's like a weird audio snippet that just sort of represents like a new level of kind of, going down the ladder being unlocked in the way a traditional song wouldn't.
It feels like, say, that coming out of Godsmack, like you've had the overdose, you are now like at the most broken point you could possibly be, and then you get this 40-second freak out coming through. It was almost kind of like being jolted back into like life, into this waking nightmare you experience. Is almost kind of how I feel about Iron Gland. Like
there are parts on this album when like the dark doom factor gets so overbearing. I get the same kind of horrific feel from the melodies that I do get from like more melodic Slayer songs, a la like Dead Skin Mask or Bloodline. Like the pre-chorus in Hate to Feel with the stare at me with empty eyes and point your words at me is so dark. It like sends a chill up your spine. It's got those like thick growling guitars lurking behind it, and then finally reaching that rock bottom truly in Angry Chair, which is a fucking incredible song. Like the simplicity in that riff and that drum part, again, the way like Lane wrote that song, and it almost feels like he's like just learned guitar and has played the most simple riff, but it's so how much eeriness and wrongness it conveys. It is like all of that. How the fuck did I reach this point? How did I get here? Kind of hallucinatory, unable to tell fiction from reality. What you were saying earlier, Elliot, about the kind of like, not recognizing the person that brought you to that point. There's literally the saw my reflection and cried in that song, which is so real and so upsetting in terms of the context of that. It feels like being in like the darkest room with boarded up windows, just the shadows from the candle flickering on the wall. Like, it's so far removed from being a functioning human at that point.
It's things as well, like, and like the alternative being like that corporate prison, like a dull boy walk all day. It's kind of like he's looking at like the alternative to being this heroin destroyed mess and kind of processing what is like worse. And again, it's just the complete broken down like hopelessness of it. And again, like, I consider when we're sort of taking this for like that industrial thing because of how musically quite simplistic and grinding it is, but it all just adds to, again, just the sort of suffocating weight of the song.
There's a weird thing with these like drug-fueled records in that if the album itself is depressing, but the people who made it got through to the other side, you kind of take comfort in that. And then there's this other thing where sometimes the music is almost celebratory and fun. But if they didn't make it, then it gets this whole new aura to it. Angry Chair is one of those songs where it's made so much more upsetting by knowing what happened to Lane. But even if that hadn't happened, it's already genuinely difficult to listen to, I think.
Yeah, but then the melodic burst in that song, despite being quite subdued compared to, Wood or Rain When I Die or even Junkhead, almost like it kind of, this is all the energy it can muster at this point. But God, I love it. It's one of my all-time favourite Alice in Chains melodies. That, like, it's so melancholic, but oddly content with it at the same time. Like that, I don't mind, yeah. It's kind of, it's like it doesn't know anything different at this point. Like and the melody and the vocal is almost like admitting defeat and just sort of, here I am.
I don't mind, lost my mind. Like,
yeah, but it's so beautiful in a strange kind of way. And then we've spoken a bit in the last few years about some of the new album releases that have the lead single tucked away as the closing track on an album, and the interesting kind of recontextualization and new sort of discovery that you get with that song when you hear it, track 13 on the album. Wood is almost like the original Bullseye example, I think, because it's an amazing single for all the things we spoke about at the start of this discussion. But it also has to be in the conversation for the best album closers. And musically, like, coming out of how Through the Circles of Hell that side B has taken you, this burst of like light at the end of it, but it's so pained and weathered. And this song that's again inspired by this like lost friend, Andrew Wood, who died from the same things that the band themselves are still going through in the context of this album. It puts its like super haunting coda onto the album because it's asking you not to judge, it's to consider yourself in his shoes. And that coming after the Heroin Suite, it's like this album is the story of my addictions and personal hell, but could this happen to you? Are you susceptible to the same things that I was?
I mean, with Wood, the thing that the bit that I was the most tragic is the outro, the am I wrong, have I run too far to get home? And that is the kind of, that really puts into like the stark like is there no turning back at this point? Is this it's that thing of like, is this what awaits me? Am I going to meet the same fate? And again, just I say, like, to not judge, like, this album dances this line between like being really like genuinely sympathetic to addicts without like ever glamorizing it, and it's so real in that way. And I think it's such a difficult, like, that's such like a genuinely difficult thing to do, of like not being judgmental in the slightest, but not trying to like sugarcoat it either. And I think this song is like the perfect example of being that, of like trying to like ask you to relate and be like, look, this is about loss of control. These people aren't entirely to blame for when this addiction takes over and destroys them.
It's funny because it is probably the most radio friendly song on the record, and it does feel like, you say, the light comes through, but you don't necessarily get the feeling that things are going to be okay now. Like that line about Have I Run Too Far to Get Home? Again, it's that thing I was saying earlier about reckoning with how much of it is your fault. And it's that thing for me where, like you say, something, it's not necessarily judging addicts or people who have fallen into it, but it's that old cliche of like, there's no better piece of advice than a warning.
Yeah.
It's like going, this is the reality of it. And
Yeah.
that, just as a way to end your record, so matter-of-factly, and also ending on a question, it's fucking, like, it is just one of the, like Her, it's one of the only comparisons I can think of where when the record ends, you don't just go, okay, now what next? You just sit there for a minute or two, go,
but
Christ.
You've got to remember as well that this is like just, a couple years off of, past, Reagan and the war on drugs being, a huge cultural point in America at the time. And again, the way that this kind of, it puts that question of like, this is a chronicling of pain and addictions and so on. But, again, huge, massively selling album, putting the question out there again, not to, so many people would look at, a heroin addict, like, I mean, any number of people involved with this scene and sort of look down their noses at them. And this, again, it puts that challenge out there to consider, are you actually better than me? If you experience the things I did, could you end up in the same situation, And, like, what a question that is to carry into the wide success of this album. Like, again, Lane Staley, you never know how much of this stuff is kind of urban legend, but apparently he turned his vocal recording booth for this album into a shrine consisting of candles, a picture of the Last Supper, and a dead puppy in a jar. God knows where he got the fucking puppy from, but like that's the atmosphere that seems to exist in Dirt, and the result is surely one of the darkest and most harrowing albums to ever achieve such ubiquitous status. Like producing 5 video singles, the videos as well. Like again, we mentioned Rooster with the Vietnam one, but like some crazy ones like Angry Chair again is so dark, even though he has like a bush baby on him or like a Galogo or something. He just has some weird little primate just sitting on his shoulder. Don't know how they had access to that, probably the same place as the puppy. But then Bones always freaks me out as well, like just Lane's chin beard alone. He's just sort of like crouching in a little dirt cave like Gollum or something. Like,
that's the
changes
one
his look so much. Yeah,
that video
bizarre.
is the iconic Alice in Chains image to me for so long.
Yeah, like just surreal, dark imagery. But 5 songs from this going to get MTV airplay, and that's, like we said, that doesn't include Rain With I Die. It doesn't include most of the mid chunk of this album. It doesn't include Damn That River even, which for most people be like, oh yeah, that's the rocker, we'll put that one out first. It goes 5 times platinum, number 5 on the Billboard 200, which I guess compared to Facelift, that's the 90 to 92 paradigm shift in full effect there. It stays in that chart in America for over 100 solid weeks. Gets him another Grammy nomination. The entire Dirt album is nominated for Hard Rock Performance, beaten this time by Red Hot Chili Peppers' Give It Away single. The one song of Give It Away is better than the entire album. Everything we've just said.
This is why the Grammys have always been a joke.
Yeah, fucking bizarre. But I guess this brings us to the question. I don't know if there is another album from this time, maybe like Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, just because it's so fucking long and there's so many songs to talk about, but I don't know if there's another one that we would dedicate as much in-depth sort of detail to as we have just done with Dirt. Is this the best album of the grunge era?
I don't know, like, this is such a difficult question for me to answer, because again, there are like 5 albums from that era, like in particular, like if we're talking like even if we're just talking like the Seattle bands that I think are just totally flawless, and Dirt has its own like aura that is so hard to process, and kind of to take the album on its own merits is like difficult. That I don't know if I can say like if it's the best. I'm going to just ramble because I don't know if I can say it's the best. Like, it is the most impactful in a lot of ways, absolutely.
By the grunge era, are you saying grunge bands or just like rock metal big name bands from like 1990 to 94?
Yeah, like alternative rock, things that were associated at least tangentially to the grunge movement. I'm not saying, it came out the same year as Tomb and the Mutilated, so it's part of the grunge era. Like, but bands who could be vaguely associated with, you know, the grunge or alternative whatever tag in the early to mid 90s.
See, when you said it, I thought, like this album is a 10, but there's got to be one. But I'm thinking like Ritual de la Habitual. I'm thinking Siamese Dream, the Primus albums I love, Angel Dust.
It's basically, I love those two Soundgarden albums so much that, like...
I will come in here and say, again, grunge albums, Seattle albums, whatever.
Okay.
The answer is easily.
Then yes.
Fucking easily. Like, obviously, Nevermind is the most important.
Yeah.
In Utero and Super Unknown, Melancholy or Siamese Dream, you know, yes, 10 or Verses if you like. They're Hall of Fame albums. I think this is the album from that movement that could be a genuine contender to be the greatest rock album of all time. Like, when you think about the category that people talk about of like Pet Sounds, Rumours, The Wall, OK Computer, Disintegration, Paranoid and Master of Puppets for a couple of offerings from the classic metal world, Dirt, for not only its collection of classic songs, which goes toe-to-toe with any other album like it, but its construction as an album is beyond. The places it takes you, and the absolutely unfaltering emotional rawness and deep power driving it all. Again, those questions that it throws out to you as a listener, it belongs in those discussions. And it doesn't get mentioned as being there as enough, I think, for all the plaudits this album has. You know, like, this is, like I said, fucking Disintegration, Rumours, whatever, I don't care. Dirt is one of those albums. And at the same time, beyond all of those, it belongs next to the darkest, most transgressive and bleak extreme listens from this time, where we've mentioned fucking Acid Bath and all this stuff. And, like, even Alice in Chains, there are other records from this era, Facelift, whatever, the Jar of Flies EP, they belong in that grunge hall of fame next to those other records. But Dirt is just beyond. Like, Dirt transcends. It's one of the great pieces of art to come from dudes playing guitars.
I think you are spot on, because again, like me, I was just kind of weighing up how much for me those like particularly those two Soundgarden records are for me. But I can understand what you mean, where like the wider impact of what Dirt represents as a piece of art, I can see how that stretches beyond simply being a grunge album.
I think like the one that's holding me back, I would say, is Siamese Dream. That's the only thing that I'm kind of going, who knows? But now that I'm thinking...
It's a walk in the park next to Dirt, you know?
Well, that's it. That's the thing, is like, and not only is it so much easier to listen to, and I have all these great personal associations with that record.
Even though it's like 70 minutes long, Super Unknown is a much easier listen for me than Dirt is. Like,
but like you were saying about Dirt being in that league, you do just... Now, if you got like, what are the perfect rock albums? Like Desert Island, whatever metric you want to take, and you just go, you know, Wish You Were Here, all the ones you've mentioned, Sgt. Pepper's.
My point is exactly that. It's that Dirt is the album from, you know, this collection of bands, however loose you want to take that goes in that selection.
And that's mad with like Nevermind.
Yeah. But Nevermind's a pop record compared to this, you know? It's like fucking, this is just unbelievable. Like I said, one of the great pieces of art.
Yeah, and like you said, with Nirvana, and I don't know if it's just their ubiquitousness or whatever, but like Dirt might be the only record. In fact, I probably will say the only record from this time where I'm yet to encounter someone who has a real criticism of it. And I'm not saying real as in going like, that's not real, but I've never heard like a passioned speech against it.
Against
and it's
Dirt,
like you It's like you say, it's from all circles. It's like even people I know who are the type who go like, and then metal died in the 90s. You talk to them about their favourite records, and one of them will say Dirt, and the rest of them go, yeah. And you just go, like, it just has this, for a record that, like you say, we've compared to Acid Bath, and people who are fans of Pig Destroyer,
I Hate
God, will find something here. And yet, 5 times platinum, some of the most perfectly written rock song. Jesus, like... maybe. I think it could be.
And then you did say earlier as well, but, you know, not to be crass, I think over the years it has become, it's not a victorious album, you know.
No.
Like it's a man chronicling a slow death that a decade after the fact would eventually, you know, kind of fulfill itself. And that, again, it's so fucking serious, you know, it's so real. And I think of these huge classic rock albums that we cover on these specials, this, I think, is one of the hardest ones to pick a best song, because, wow, is this a track list?
See, you say that, and I would agree, but I do just have a clear favourite on this album. Like, and again, like, there are so many 10 out of 10 songs that I'm like, that should be number one pick, but Down in a Hole for me is just a song that is, again, it will just leave me speechless every time I hear it. I think it is one of the genuinely, like, greatest rock ballad, possibly the greatest rock ballad. Like, I feel that strongly about Down in a Hole. I think it is so, like, transfixing and haunting and just melodically just perfect in every sense. As I say, like, there's a lot of perfect songs on this record. Down in a Hole is the most perfect.
Elliot, you said something sort of similar about Rooster earlier, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, I think Rooster is... Yeah, like you said, I said there's songs that... On this perfect record, there are songs that are more perfect. And Rooster is... For all the other songs that take my breath away, it's one of those where it's like... For the thing that it is, it's so unique and so perfect. It's a weird song to almost critically analyse, because I don't know what else to compare it to. And yeah, I know it's like the perfect platonic version of the singular thing that it is. That doesn't even make any sense. But when I look at the track list and the other songs where, like you say, pick 99 point however many nines you like percent of records ever made, it's the standout song. Rooster just has that sort of... I think just because of how I've never heard anything else like it, it edges it by just enough.
Yeah, like Wood, by rights, like Man in the Box is so obviously a standout, should be an immediate answer. Like I said, it's one of the best album closers ever. I don't know if it makes my top 3 on Dirt.
Yeah.
Down in a Hole, by rights, one of the single greatest ballads of all time, which should also be immediate answer. It's unbelievably perfect, Down in a Hole. Rooster, by rights, unbelievably special song. This incredibly moving testament to, you know, the human spirit and the things suffered by your fathers should be the right answer. As a little metal kid, the first 2 Alice in Chains songs I adored were the opening 2 tracks on this album. Like, Them Bones is one of the best things ever, and yet picking it as the best song on Dirt would somehow seem...
I mean, I said it's the best grunge opener, and like, and a lot of people would normally go to Nevermind for that, but I'm like, no, Them Bones is like the opener.
Yeah, the dark horse on the album for me is I love Angry Chair, and like, that was a single. How the fuck is that a song that gets a music video? It's just like they're straight up like rewriting how dark and discomforting a radio single can be. The literal rock bottom of the album. Half of this album is a right answer, and the impassioned, you know, answers both of you have given on your respective choices. Like, yeah, fair. I think I have to chicken out and go back to my default answer, which is that Damn That River is one of the best riffs ever written. And Angry Chair and Down in a Hole will take me off guard more at a vulnerable moment and just make me go, holy fuck. But if I want to hear a song from Dirt at any given moment, Damn That River will do. You know, the straight up fuck you determination in that song, the ultimate spit in the eye. It's what rock music is about, you know, like, you want to start a fucking riot, cover that song.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd be between that and the Downhill on the opening 2, but pick a favourite song off Dirt. Like, okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and that's what I mean.